Hey, everyone. Welcome to Locked On Lakers for Friday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky. Andy, have you ever been on an awkward plane flight? Like maybe with an ex-girlfriend or a person who won't give you enough armrest or whatever it might be?
Brian, I went on so many family plane rides, and you know I always sat next to you.
Yeah.
They were all awkward.
Yeah, always. None of that compares to anything the Lakers are doing on Friday as they go to Orlando with Russell Westbrook and Frank Vogel on the same airplane. We'll talk about that and more coming up next on Locked On Lakers.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Want to thank everybody for making Locked On Lakers your first listen of every day, Monday through Friday, sometimes Saturdays and Sundays. We get this thing up for you as early as we possibly can. Again, even earlier sometimes on the Locked On Lakers YouTube channel, you can get the next day's show today often. And want to let everybody know, Locked On Rams, new host Travis Rogers. Go check that out. Rams have a huge playoff game this weekend in Tampa Bay. So, Travis, great guy, great host. And you are going to love that show.
He knows that team exceptionally well.
Pre- and post-game host for the Rams. So he's like tied into what they're doing there. Can't do any better than Travis. So congratulations to the network for getting him. All right. So let's recap before we get to where the Lakers are going, because
the scene, shall we?
Because where they're going is important. It is critical and it is difficult. And there's some basketball stuff in there too. That's gonna iron itself out. But let's go back, Andy, to a crazy Wednesday night.
We were all so much younger then, Brian.
Yeah, but I am so much older now.
It really does. As we discussed, this season is aging the ever-living crap out of James Worthy.
I feel like it's like I came into this like when I thought they were getting Buddy Hield. I looked like Lincoln in year one. Like by the end of it, I looked like Lincoln like days before he went to Ford's Theater. So if you missed it, the Frank Vogel's job security has obviously been a huge topic of conversation throughout the week. The Lakers lose a terrible game against a team that hadn't won, an Indiana team that hadn't won a road game since I believe November. They had lost 10 of 11 overall. And there's just, it was awful and it was weird. The lineups were odd. Carmelo Anthony played 30 minutes and all, but it was punctuated, Andy, by Russell Westbrook sitting for the final 4 minutes of the fourth quarter. Asked about that in and of itself is a nuclear bomb, which we can discuss. Afterwards, Frank Vogel was asked why. And rather than sort of support, he's our core guy, he's just having an off night. It happens to even the greatest superstar. I was playing the guys I thought would win the game.
I'm just letting that settle in. Pregnant pause,
yes.
A little bit of drama, let it stew for you exactly what Frank Vogel was saying about the team, that fourth quarter, crunch time, and Russell Westbrook, ostensibly one of this team's big three, certainly salary-wise, if nothing else. He is a future Hall of Famer. He is one of the top 75 players of all time. He is a former MVP. He is also a very mercurial force of nature. Continue.
So Russell Westbrook left the building without speaking to reporters, which I think we both agreed was probably best for everyone. Late in the evening, Andy, as people probably even after they already went to bed, Dave McMenamin, outstanding reporter for ESPN, covers LeBron, covers the Lakers, has done a great job with that for years, came out with a bomb of a report that said this wasn't Frank Vogel freelancing, because I took him to benching Vogel as Westbrook, Vogel benching Westbrook as the move of a guy who knew he was going to be fired and was kind of flipping the bird to the front office. You people did this to me. In fact, He had been given, according to this report from Dave McMenamin, Frank Vogel had been given the coaching staff had been given the green light to coach Westbrook as they see fit, even if that means pulling him from a game, as Vogel did for the final 3 minutes and 52 seconds of the fourth quarter against Indiana, sources told ESPN. One source close to the situation described the message from management to the staff as, "You got to do what you got to do." I have a few thoughts on why this is so important and what it means, and where it probably came from, but I'm sure you do as well. And I've been talking a lot, so go ahead.
Well, I mean, first thing that I think is worth noting is none of that means that it was not Frank Vogel giving the middle finger to the front office. That
That was one of my points too.
You need because you had set it up as the possibility that this was more him working hand in glove with them, having been given a license to operate as he wants to, and therefore more potential backing. No, that's actually just the front office saying, you know what, do what you got to do, and however those chips fall, they will fall.
Right, and by the way, and the results are on you.
Right, the results are on you. And I mean, the flip side of all of this is, if you know that you may get fired anyway, they can't fire you twice. So you can play whoever the hell you want. If Frank Vogel didn't have the green light, but he thought that he was going to get fired anyway, to some degree, that green light doesn't even matter.
Yep. So do you think Frank Vogel's putting his hand in Rob Pelinka's glove that much these days? I don't see them working that. I feel like that's a tense relationship right now.
No, the only glove I think he would like around Rob Pelinka would be a boxing style glove, and right at Pelinka's gorgeous face. So I think that's one of the things that has to be noted from the beginning is, just because you got the do what you got to do directive or permission structure doesn't necessarily mean that wasn't Frank Vogel saying to the front office, "This is what you stuck me with. These are the constrictions that I'm dealing with." I just think
you are 1,000% correct, and I'm so glad you started there. Go on. What else stuck out to you?
That Frank Vogel is, for however long he is going to be coach of this team, and that is an hour-to-hour, minute-to-minute, second-by-second fluid situation, he has clearly reached a place where he is not afraid to play with fire. Like he is going to, similar to what we talked about, and this is really interesting, is a very full circle thing, or close to full circle, because it feels like the circle is pretty damn close to complete with Vogel and this team. The second game of Vogel's tenure with the Lakers, he played with fire by starting Anthony Davis at center the second game of the season against the Utah Jazz.
Yes, he did.
And this was not long after Anthony Davis had been on record noting his well-reported disinclination to play center. Yeah, I mean, everybody has known this about Anthony Davis, and Anthony Davis noted there will obviously be times where I play center, but I think everybody was sort of in an acknowledged and even unacknowledged agreement that this would be on a case-by-case basis, as needed, hopefully needed as little as possible. Frank Vogel, as the team was getting beaten by the Jazz, shifted to Anthony Davis playing center to start a game, second game of the season, which is
start the second half
of that game. That is really early to fire that bullet. And you and I both noted at the time, exceptionally ballsy of Vogel to do that. It worked. The Lakers won the game. They came back from being down. And I thought that established Vogel from the outset of his time with the Lakers as somebody that, as much as he has a very low-key demeanor and he's kind of all shucks in the way he presents himself, he's not afraid and he's not a pushover.
Right. And that, the context, remember, there too, is like they lost their opener, and this was still at a time when there was no presumption that the team was going to succeed early, and it was presumed that Jason Kidd was there to pick up the pieces after Frank Vogel didn't work. And maybe 30 games in would get fired. And so I think that's a great comparison. I'll tell you another thing that stuck out to me, and I am not the only person who thought this. I was reading Tom Ziller's newsletter, great basketball writer, and he kind of pointed this out too, really in more clarity than I was pointing it out in my own head. It feels, if you read Dave's report, there was a lot of detail in there about why Westbrook was pulled, and most of it was defensive. It wasn't that he was 5 of 17. It was a lot of defensive stuff, and it was very specific. It was specific to moments in the game, play in the fourth quarter, where they've been telling guys, don't let Karis LeVert go to his right. Russ misplayed the thing, and Russ being average to poor defensively is not a new thing, but it was enough to get him pulled from the game.
This was about 7 minutes left in the game. And also it's important to note, this was also on the heels of Westbrook missing a jumper. And, this was coming in a second half where he was not making shots at all, which even if this was more about defense than offense, when it is, coming in concert with offensive struggles, like immediately afterwards, it's going to magnify it that much more. Like this was something
get the coaching staff's attention.
Right. This is before we even read this from Dave, and people should definitely read this because it's really good, specific reporting. This was something in my game notes, that sequence of like, oh my God, that is a disaster sequence for Russ.
So that was what was noted by the staff when they're and why we pulled him and all that stuff. To me, and I'm guessing, but at this point, everybody who's got access to anybody, like the leaks are, I referred to it on Thursday show as whack-a-mole. I mean, they're coming from everywhere. The call is coming from inside the house at this point.
A lot of phones.
Everybody's got one. But this feels to me like a leak, like Dave is talking to the coaching staff, people on the coaching staff, just because of the specificity of what he's pointing out and why I don't feel like Rob Pelinka would have told him exactly what the play was that got him thinking.
He was busy reading during it.
What would Pablo Neruda do? But the quotes about not just why they pulled Westbrook, but pointing to getting management's approval to do things like this are really significant in terms of that Vogel sticking up for himself thing and kind of the dynamics of it. And Ziller pointed this out in a really interesting way, and I was sort of tinkering around with it, and I'll explain it next.
Locked On Lakers brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline wants to wish you a happy new betting year as we continue the march to the playoffs and beyond. And BetOnline remains the #1 spot for all the best sports wagering action in 2022. It's a new year and a new updated desktop and mobile website. To sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit, just use the promo code LOCKEDON to get started. From football, basketball, hockey, boxing, UFC, right down to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available in 2022. BetOnline, the fastest, easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the games start.
All right, so I'll read this from Ziller. He is one of these guys. I know everybody's got a newsletter these days and all that, and the subscriptions do start to add up. His is worth subscribing to. I'll just read from it. The other issue here is that Westbrook is smart and reads the media. The front offices, the Rambuses, or as we call them, the Rambi. For good's sake, the Rambuses read the media. Does anybody think Westbrook is going to take kindly to reading that A, Vogel asked permission to bench Westbrook during a tough spell, B, the front office granted it, and C, the moment in which Vogel made the decision to do it is spelled out? Does anyone think Rob Pelinka or Kurt Rambis, it's 2022. We're talking about Kurt Rambis with respect and in a position of power with a team, an NBA team, are going, I love that he threw that aside in there, are going to take kindly to reading that they gave Vogel permission to bench one of the team's stars. That dynamic, Andy, where he's like, it's not only like, hey, I'm taking the brunt of this because, awkward plane flight, as we mentioned in the open. Russell Westbrook, an extraordinarily prideful player. In doing this report removes a lot of that plausible deniability or whatever from management. And it says to Russ, it says to Team Russ, it says to everybody, no. It's not just me. It's like they recognize that you're not doing it either. And that you're a part of this problem and not helping. And maybe it's not going as well as it's supposed to. So in some ways, whether intentional or not, this report ties the front office to the same move with an incredibly prideful and incredibly mercurial player. And I mean, I think this is interesting too. You can, if you want to talk about that part of it, or like benching Russell Westbrook for the final 4 minutes of a game like this is a nuclear option. once you do that, like it's done, and the relationship is forever changed.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
this is a BFD,
we
as the kids would say.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this a little bit on Thursday's show, and it's not a total apples to apples comparison, because one coach was much more in the wrong in the way he handled it, than the other. But in 2012, when Mike D'Antoni benched Pau Gasol for an entire fourth quarter and was asked about the thought process behind that, why he did that, and he said, I wanted to win the game. That might not be his exact words. It was pretty damn close.
It's pretty damn close.
That relationship between D'Antoni and Pau Gasol, and you and I were around, we were in the locker room, we covered those teams on a daily basis. It was never good from that point forward.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, D'Antoni was in a position where he needed to use far more tact than he did, and Pau had not been nearly as problematic, or at least periodically problematic, a player as Russ has been. And also Pau Gasol had earned the equity at that point of 2 championships with the Lakers, and Mike D'Antoni had been on the job for like a week and a half. So, I mean, and you and I covered D'Antoni, and I think we both got along with him, but he ain't a politician. Mike D'Antoni has never.
And the politics, actually, the hardest thing I think he had to deal with here, the part he struggled with the most, was the playing the media and understanding how he says stuff and what it means and how it's going to be perceived, and biting his tongue when he didn't want to say anything.
Right.
Vogel's much better at that.
I was going to say, as opposed to Frank Vogel, who I think actually is a politician and has handled the politics of being the Lakers coach right down to the outset when he was hired, and he was introduced in a farcical press conference where, because it had been a bleep show for the Lakers for like 6 months, and nobody in the front office had spoken to anybody during this period after Luke Walton was let go, after Magic resigned, after all this stuff. The first time anybody heard from anybody from management was Rob Pelinka there to introduce Vogel, and all of the questions basically went to Rob Pelinka, some form of the hell, man. And Vogel handled that press conference exceptionally well.
Mm-hmm.
He managed to win the room in impossible circumstances, in part because he handled the politics of it very well, which speaks to exactly where they are right now, where Vogel would say, F the politics. And to make it clear, I agree with Carmelo Anthony that this is likely not personal against Westbrook, even if he is exasperated by Westbrook.
No, I don't think on a personal level Frank Vogel dislikes or even doesn't respect Russell Westbrook. I think Vogel has a tremendous amount of respect for what Westbrook has accomplished, for who the player he is, for the sort of energy that he plays with, and all that stuff, all the stuff that makes Russ Russ. I think it's not personal in that way. It is personal in the way that Russ plays and his shortcomings at a time when Vogel is game to game with his job security.
Well, and Russ also, really quick, not to interrupt you, Russ represents all of the reasons, or at least all of the structural roster reasons that Vogel is struggling, even if it's obviously, to be clear, not all Russell Westbrook.
But the politics, people, we've gotten people all year long. He should be the sixth man. He should come off the bench. They should, should have established early that he's not going to play in every fourth. No, that is not how this works. It is not how it was ever going to work. It never would have, this thing would have blown up in game 3 if that was the option. You're going to do what? No, I'm not doing that. You can pull that lever once. And I'm not saying that the relationship between Russell Westbrook and Vogel is irreparably damaged, that Russ is going to tank games and he's not going to play hard and all this other, but it's different. You heard LeBron say it. LeBron was asked about this after the game on Wednesday. What do you think how do you think Russ feels about this? And LeBron was basically like, the answer to that question. Is he a proud guy? Yes. Is he, an intense competitive guy? Yes. I'm not doing your work for you. Here's LeBron, the answer to that question.
LeBron, actually, this was great. And I wish more athletes would do this. LeBron it was Bill Oram from The Athletic who was actually asking the question. And when he answered LeBron's question for him, LeBron gave him the the permission to just quote himself.
Yes.
And I wish more athletes would just do that. It would make everybody's life easier. The writers, the athletes, just like pick the guys who've been around the team that well, they're
Right.
responsible for their
you
job.
know that they know what you're going to say.
Yeah, I mean, just
Yeah, you're right.
cut off the middleman.
There are a lot of times when you ask questions like, I know what the answer is. I'm not allowed to quote myself, and I'm not
Right.
allowed to invent the quote. But
He also was going to see a movie afterwards with his
Right.
wife, which I found amazing. It was going to start like an 11 o'clock movie.
he's
at
got childcare.
At age 37, you put me in a dark room. I mean, I'm older than that, but even at 37, you put me in a dark room at 11.
Done.
Out.
So
he's got energy.
You can do this one time. And the minute you do it, it doesn't mean that the relationship is done. It doesn't mean that you can't get past it, or that Russell Westbrook's going to be, benched in the fourth quarters going forward. But when you do it the way he did, and you respond to the question the way he did, it's very pointed, and it changes the dynamic of this team significantly. It changes their relationship significantly. And it's just one more thing to discuss as the Lakers get on what is going to be a very awkward plane flight, which we'll talk about, for an incredibly important and very long and very difficult road trip. All of that coming up next.
Locked On Lakers brought to you by Built Bar. It's the new year, and that means New Year's resolutions. And if yours is about getting fit or just eating healthier, Built Bar can be a part of that plan. Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, and it makes it so you can eat healthy, but it doesn't get boring. So after like a few weeks, you're like, oh, this is the worst. And I want some chocolate, man. Well, guess what? Built Bars are covered in 100% chocolate. Most of them contain just 130 calories, only 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, but 17 grams of protein. That's the good stuff. So even if you're not into working out, you can reward yourself afterwards. That's the carrot as opposed to the stick, something that tastes good.
This
Tons of great.
is the carrot, Andy.
Yes. It's it's like a chocolate covered carrot. There are a lot of great flavors to choose from, like coconut almond, peanut butter brownie, cookies and cream, mint brownie. I should correct myself. A chocolate covered carrot sounds terrible. It's going to be better than that. Go to built.com. Use the promo code LOCK15. Get 15% off your order. Again, promo code LOCK15. 15% off at built.com.
I really want to eat these carrots, but I can't because there's nothing more irritating in a podcast than listening to someone chew. So that's not a choice. On a scale of 1 to 10, Andy, how awkward do you think this plane flight's going to be?
Oh my. Oh my. It ain't gonna be easy.
How do you handle this? Do you like, Russ, you and me in the back of the plane, we're gonna hash this out. We're gonna fix our beef before we land.
Well, you know what? It's funny you say that. They've both had time, presumably, to cool off a bit and like let the immediate emotion of this. And I think this was very emotional for both Vogel and Westbrook.
That's why Westbrook didn't speak, because he didn't want to be quoted at that moment.
Right.
And that's fine.
Yeah. Russ, as much as Russ does his Russ shtick often after games and can be uncommunicative and basically hostile, like he shows up, fine, whatever. I don't blame him for taking this one off. Nothing good was going to
come out of him speaking. For Westbrook, for Vogel, for the Lakers, nothing good was going to come out of it.
Yeah, I mean, having players have to respond to Russ's comments, like
nothing good.
They got a long flight. It may not be the worst thing in the world for the two of them to take a private part of this private plane and talk through some stuff, assuming there's anything that really needs to be said. I mean, Russ probably knows exactly why this happens. He may think that Vogel overreacted, or he brings other stuff to the table that would offset this, whatever. But Russ can conceptually get why this happened.
I heard something interesting from Kevin O'Connor at The Ringer, another great basketball writer today. And, he was alluding to a lot of the stuff we've talked about. Like, how much can Russ change? How much is it on to Russ change? What does a changed Russ look like? Any of all of that stuff. And, like the onus is on Russ to do it. And there's, the example of LeBron playing center. He pointed out the example of Anthony, Dwight Howard kind of reforming his game to stay in the league, of Carmelo Anthony reforming his game to stay in the league, and that Westbrook is at a place where he needs to do some of those things as well. And some of that is defensive intensity. Some of that is attention to detail. I think actually offensively, he is doing mostly what he needs to do in terms of shot selection and not trying to dominate the ball. Although when he does have it, he does seem to use it a lot.
But here, this is actually, it's a very double-edged sword that you bring that up, Brian, because that is a glass half full, glass half empty look at this, because it'd be one thing if Russell's offensive struggles were all just about he's taking crazy shots that you know that he shouldn't, he has no business taking. He's been relatively responsible with his shots. That could arguably make this whole thing even scarier.
Yeah, I mean,
because he's doing the things he's supposed to be doing that are supposed to be in his wheelhouse, and they're still not falling.
Not working. Right. And I think this is, he's not doing anything wrong per se. You pointed this out. Like, Russ is being Russell Westbrook mostly. And that's what he's supposed to do. The question really becomes, like, how much is a guy like Russell Westbrook capable of changing stuff? And how quickly? And then what? And so, like, when you talk about Dwight Howard, Kevin O'Connor is correct. Dwight Howard did reform his game. It took 4 years for him to stop, or 5 years for him to stop being 4 or 5 years for him to stop pretending he was a first team All NBA superstar, needed to be treated as such. And he was basically down to his last chance to stay in the league.
Had DeMarcus Cousins not gotten hurt before the Lakers season began, there is a decent chance Dwight would not have re-entered the league. I'm not going to say absolutely, but I don't think it's impossible.
It's not right.
He would have been out.
Carmelo Anthony literally was out of the league before he came back to in a new role that he had to understand and embrace. The idea that Westbrook could instantly understand this stuff and instantly change and instantly do all these things and become a new player in a different role, to the extent that he's capable of doing it even. And I'm not sure what he is, so singular in how he does things and what he does, that I'm not sure what's possible or what that even looks like. Because also too, athletically, defense is different than offense. And I don't know what, if he's quite got the chops defensively to do that kind of stuff that the Lakers might need him to do. But the idea that it's going to happen in 3 weeks, in 2 months, in 3 weeks, whatever it is, over the course of a single season in which he was brought in to be Russell Westbrook, just seems unfair to Russ, to be honest with you. It's not that anybody's wrong. It's just, it is a ridiculous expectation for somebody who is a top 75 of all time guy to just instantly reform his game and do all that stuff in the course of a month, because you see the plan A isn't working. And this, by the way, is why it was potentially problematic to bring him here in the first place.
I don't want to spend too long on this, just because I know we wanted to talk a little bit about LeBron and Melo's comments about Frank Vogel, just, player comments on it, but just a couple reactions I had to that. First of all, I would disagree that this is supposed to be an instantaneous change for Russ, because Russ has been in the position the last few seasons where it's been pretty obvious he has needed to change. So there's been a runway leading up to this point. He has largely refused to do that. He's made, I think, little concessions, but by everybody's accounts, Russ has basically been Russ. The other thing, though, that I think is worth pointing out, there's kind of some Allen Iverson in Russ. And I'm a massive Allen Iverson fan. He's one of my all-time favorite players. Iverson was unwilling to change, and he basically unwillinged himself out of the league.
Yep.
And there are certain superstar players, Vince Carter's the guy that comes to mind most for me, that showed a pretty amazing adaptability. Like, the last third of Vince Carter's career was both fascinating and I think really enjoyable to watch, And, there are certain things that he was able to adapt well towards because, for example, he's a very good shooter. So he's always able to shoot. So that makes it easier to become 3 and D. But the flip side is he was never a defensive player during his superstar heyday. And he made a point of becoming better at it. And there are things that Russell Westbrook can do defensively, like in terms of just awareness, in terms of things that he is supposed to be doing in terms of the game plan. We talked about making sure Karis LeVert goes left as opposed to right. I'm sorry, man. Those are things within Russ's control he is.
I agree with you.
I'm not saying that he's bucking up against this as a principle thing. I'm saying whether out of habit, whether out of personality, whatever, he's not being attentive to those sorts of things that were, I'm sure, part of, remember the grand dinner that LeBron and AD and Russ had at LeBron's house? They took the elevator in LeBron's house up to probably his, I don't know, other house, like whatever.
his Cloud City.
Yes, like up to Bespin. And I'm sure this came up. This had to have come up. Like there are certain things. My
point. No, I agree. I'm not trying to absolve him of responsibility.
I know you're not. I'm just saying.
My point is, habits are incredibly hard to break.
They are. I also smoked for like almost 20 years and I quit, and that was brutal. Like,
right, but it took 20 years. And how many of those years did you know it was probably not a good idea?
Well, a lot of the. Well, you know what?
And how many times did it take you to quit?
Well, I was going to say many of those years that I spent saying that I was trying to quit, I was not trying to quit at all. Which is my point.
But same, it's like but that's kind of my point. The arc of these things is rarely instant, and they often take longer. And sometimes you think you're doing it, and you're not. And sometimes you're trying, and it's just harder. And
I always knew that I wasn't quitting smoking. Right. It was pretty.
That's really easy because you find yourself smoking. It's the evidence is right in front of you.
I knew when I was talking a big game about this versus when I actually was.
So did I.
To quit.
I mean, I remember some of this. I mean, yeah, you're not quitting, but. And I only say this because, it's not to absolve Russ from responsibility. These things there are things that he could at least try to do in the same way that Carmelo tries to do some of these things, even when he's not very good at them. But it's just, it is part of the fundamental problem of bringing Russ in is the expectation that, he'll be able to switch now that it really matters. Now that it's really like, some guys are built and play certain ways, and what makes them what they are, if you start to take some of those things away, they're lesser than what you need them to be. And some guys just aren't able to bend in certain ways, whether because they won't or because they can't. But anyway, you wanted to talk about LeBron and Melo before we go.
Yeah, I just thought it was pretty interesting. Their responses when being asked about Vogel's job security and the place that they were in. I thought it was interesting. Melo pointing out a few different times in a few different ways. Ultimately, man, Vogel's not the one on the court. Mm-hmm. We are. Like, there were ways that we were doing the game plan and we just didn't do it well enough. Both LeBron and Melo thought that, for example, against the Pacers, Karis LeVert just got hot. And in so many words, they were saying, and this is an old adage, but it's true. Great offense can beat great defense. I don't know if the Lakers were actually playing great defense, but
great offense always beats ordinary defense.
Yeah. But like at the end of the day, Melo was pretty adamant with the idea of just like, look, Frank Vogel can only hold our hands so far. Like we got to go out there and do it. We're grown ass men. We've been playing a long time. And LeBron, I thought was pretty complimentary of Vogel, as much as he was very wary of, I think, really creating any type of quote at all.
He was very clear, like, he got a couple of questions. He knew where things were going. He's like, if you want me to bleep, I mean, I guess I can quote him, to shit on somebody, I'm not going to do it. I think whether people were fishing for him to say something negative about Vogel or say something super positive about him, he wasn't really going to interject himself in there. But to the extent that he did, it was in support of the work that the coaching staff was done. And so you said this to me last night. Like, he could have said Frank Vogel should be the coach of this team going forward, and I'm going to be angry if he isn't. And he didn't. But the next level down is basically what he said. These guys are doing a good job. they're preparing us. It's our fault for not playing better.
Yeah, I want to make it clear. I'm not being critical of LeBron for not saying that. I just want for the listeners' benefit. Like, as much as I do think he could do that and he could absolutely get away with it, LeBron has the juice to do it. And, we've seen if LeBron was willing to publicly allow Ingram and Lonzo and Kuzma and Hart and basically the whole team twist in the wind because he was publicly lobbying for Anthony Davis to get traded there, which was received rather negatively, rightly, he certainly could handle, I guess, what would be seen as a mano-a-mano with the front office, saying Frank Vogel should be this coach of this team, because nobody would criticize him for that. But at the same time, if this is not something he feels that strongly about, I don't think he did anything wrong by not saying that. He was supportive of Vogel, and it didn't feel like backhanded support or something that was ambiguous. I think he respects Frank Vogel. And if nothing else, I think he doesn't want to. I don't think he wants to be any part of Vogel being a straight up fall guy. I think
I think that's fair. And I don't think he wants to play him out of a job.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think because motivation. We heard Antonio Daniels, for example, on Locked On NBA, Locked On's NBA insider talking about this isn't college. Guys have to go out and play, but at the same time, it's not the coach's job to rah you up, as he put it. At the same time, there is something to that. There is something, like, if you have a negative relationship with your coaching staff, you don't believe in them, you don't think they're that extra 5%, that extra 10%, whatever it is that goes beyond just professionalism, where the respect helps motivate you, and you get out there and everybody's pulling in the same direction, you're getting good results and all that. That is part of it. And if the coach doesn't have that, as it has clearly been with David Blatt when he was the coach in Cleveland, as it's been with every place Kurt Rambis has ever coached, saying. No reason, just saying. It can subtract from that effort. That is not the problem with the Lakers.
No, I agree.
I do not think they are trying to play Frank Vogel out of a job. They might anyway, but that's not the point.
They are not tanking Frank Vogel's job.
Correct.
And I think LeBron's comments made that very clear. Even if it was not, I guess, as full-throated of support as it possibly could have been, it was support. And I think that's noteworthy.
Want to thank everybody for making Locked On Lakers your first listen of every day. Again, go check out Locked On Rams for your second listen with Travis Rogers. Really excited about that. Locked On Lakers on YouTube. We'll see everyone on Monday. And who knows? Maybe Frank Vogel will be available to be a guest because he won't have a head coaching job anymore. We'll see.